Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rockey here with Father Boniface. And Father, from an episode we did a couple of weeks ago, there was an image that has stuck inside my brain. And I know that my brain is taking literary pleasure, whatever that terminology is, when paintings can be not exactly realistic the way they were, but you're seeing them a little differently. And one of the things that you gave an image of was essentially the birth of the church being that moment when Jesus is dead upon the cross, and Mary is weeping on her knees in front of it. And the Bible tells us how the sky went dark, and so therefore there was no light. But in my head, I keep seeing essentially light pouring from Jesus upon her, being that is a connection. And again, it's a mental image in my brain. It could mean nothing. But in some ways, the way that you described it as recognizing that, yes, we have many important figures in the church. St. Peter and St. Paul, they went out and they spread the gospel and they taught it. But the true starting moment being the relationship between God the Father and God the Son, and also Jesus and Mary, and seeing how we can be invited to that. And I know I mentioned before about taking things for granted and how easy it is. In my personal life, I live in Pittsburgh. We had the third strongest windstorm on record a couple weeks ago. I lost power for 7 days. We had 60% of the county out of power. And we're the second or the 20th largest city in this country. And 60% of us didn't have power. Like pretty massive. And just living that experience of not having power for nearly a week to see how much literally the electricity was taken for granted. And unlike God, electricity can get turned off. So in some ways, I'm calling for two things in this episode. One, for each of the listeners to try to imagine what is it that we take for granted, and do that by simply thinking about what would it be like if the church wasn't established, if Mary and Jesus did not establish this, what would it be like? And I can see from just your physical reactions that it's not going to be pretty. And but how much we take for granted, and because we take for granted, not only do we not appreciate it, we probably don't even really understand it. Because things you take for granted, most people don't spend the time to learn in depth about how it came to be anyways. Um, I give 500 examples, but I wanted to use that starting point as a thought process in today's episode because it's mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, it's a great thought experiment and has a real practical value as well to think about. To be grateful for various things that we easily take for granted. And I love your starting point of thinking about electricity. It is remarkable. Even for a day or two, we had the power outage here at St. Vincent last summer, I guess, and power was out for 24 48 hours, and they had thought it might go through the weekend for different reasons. And so it's like my cell phone's going to run out. I got to do work. I can only do work on my computer. I can't plug my computer in. I'm going to go get in my car and drive somewhere because I got to find a power outlet. uh, you know and if it's a larger, that was just our campus, so it was possible to drive somewhere if we had to. But when you got a whole city or a part of a city and you can't go somewhere, and I mean, it really is remarkable to think of how dependent we are on some things that we actually have nothing to do with keeping going. I don't have any influence over the power. There's nothing I can do to make it work if it stops working. And that's striking how deeply dependent I am on a huge number of people. the people to fix the things, the people to run the lines, the people to farm the, mine the fuel, the people to create the power plants, the people to distribute the power. It's like so many people that I don't even know, let alone have anything to do with or have any influence over. Or, if my computer breaks, there are certain things I can step in and adjust and fix, and I know how to, make some minimal adjustments. But my life is less dependent on my computer than it is on the power. So all of that is to say, like, it's really useful to think of that kind of thing, uh, and be aware of the level of dependency that we have, and to be grateful for what we have, and to pray for those people that we really depend on, that we never see and have practically no influence over and can so easily take for granted. None of this works without the whole human enterprise that produces it. And yet we never see those people. And so that's its own huge area, is just being aware of those things that we easily take for granted, and recognize it, praying for it, and appreciating that. So, but then specifically about the church, I mean, and we could say, Christianity, the risen Christ, the resurrection. It's like, it's impossible to comprehend what we have. So it's not an exaggeration to say that the vast majority of the arts we don't have without the church. The vast majority of science, people always think that science and faith are somehow opposed, or that the church was fostering the Dark Ages or something like that. Could not be farther from the truth. The church is really responsible for the development of modern science, promoted it explicitly, laid the philosophical foundations that form the basis of scientific inquiry. We basically wouldn't have modern science without the church. We wouldn't have modern healthcare without the church. We wouldn't have modern education without the church. We wouldn't have a whole host of books, literature, without the church. We wouldn't have architectural developments, some of the most beautiful buildings in the world without the church. We wouldn't have really the foundations of Western civilization without the church. It's like, you just go on and on. I mean, you cannot really imagine what this world is like without the church. The closest we get is a place like Papua New Guinea, that was basically isolated from all of the things that have developed in the modern world over the last thousands of years. Was isolated enough that when they discovered it in the first half of the 20th century, I think, and it is super primitive. One of the striking things is, there are cannibals there, but I mean, just technologically, tool wise, language wise, separation between tribes, in terms of clothing, architecture, permanence, agriculture, all these things. I mean, just super primitive, like Iron Age. And really, the church is at the heart of all of the development that has taken place. Now, there are some people who would say they don't believe in God, who are also played a role. Other religions got involved at different points, or people who adhere to other religions. So I don't want to make it sound like the only people that have done anything good are Catholics, but the point is that institutionally, in terms of funding, in terms of philosophical foundations, like, you don't bother studying the detailed movements of the stars for their own sake, unless you believe that there is something to be gained there in terms of understanding the creator who set the stars in motion. You don't have a Johannes Kepler without the church. You don't have a Tycho Brahe without the church. You actually don't have a Galileo without the church. He was a very devout Catholic, and his whole enterprise was supported. He was one of the first members of the Society of the Lynxes, which is now known as the Pontifical Academy of the Sciences. They funded his work, so and became, were the context in which he could develop all of that. But he wouldn't have had the faith to actually study the things have confidence that any of it fit together, or any of it made sense, or any of it was built on logical and ordered foundations. Without the church, um, gosh, you can go into every element of modern life and things that we deeply depend on and appreciate. You just don't have at all, or certainly developed in the way that they are, without the church. So that's all at an entirely human level. That's the overflow of what we actually care about. Without the church, you don't have any confidence that your loved ones are still alive in Christ. Without the church, you grieve like the Gentiles who have no hope. Without the church, you don't have the confidence to live fully, even in the face of death and the possibility of death, the risk of death, because you have no reason to believe that there is a life everlasting. Uh, Without the church, you don't have the moral foundations and the coherent moral structure that provides for even the relationships of justice between people. Without the church, you don't have a reason and foundation for mercy and the overflow of mercy that governs relationships of generosity, that stimulates things like how many charitable workers go to foreign countries and work with. One example was in, I think it was Saudi Arabia. It was a Muslim country. I can't remember which one, but they basically kicked out all of the nuns, and then discovered that they had lepers, mental patients. They had all the undesirable characters of society that the nuns were caring for, and suddenly they had to develop whole structures or just eliminate these people. So we have a hard time comprehending the impact that the church makes on our world.
Yeah, and it's something in which we all get to be called to be a part of too, to help grow it in its own unique and different ways. And to me, that part is magnificent. One of the things that is often talked about when people get into really bad times in their lives, especially in a mental state, is they don't have a feeling of any purpose, or what do I actually matter? What can I do? And we all can be a part of the church in helping this. And we've talked about in many different ways that the church has capacity for each of us, in that each part of the church does different things. Helping people, growing sciences, growing architecture. You went through all this stuff, but long story short, there is a calling and a need for each of our talents to be contributed, and that being a part of the church community, especially from the worshiping side, does give all of us a purpose and an ability to be a part of this, to be a part of what you just laid out very beautifully as something we can't imagine being without, which also means we can't imagine it being without you and your abilities and your talents in which you're growing in them to help everyone else. Because one thing that was implicit in everything that you said there was what we provide today, from developing our talents, utilizing our talents, and being in communion and relation with others. It's not just the others of this moment that benefit from it, but it's a building block for the future that all come off of the success in which we do today. So, Father, I thank you for illuminating, giving all of those great examples and teachings of what the church has done for us and what we can do for the church moving forward. Not the least of which being developing our talents and teaching them to others, and how important that is. And something to think about how we can do and grow that moving into the next week. Because we all have unique talents and abilities. We all have different preferences and desires. And how do we always turn them to the good and turn them into helping others? I mean, at the end of the day, that's one of the tenets of what we're supposed to do in the faith. And we see from the results of the 2,000 years worth of people before us, how when we wake up today, society isn't imaginable without them, and how we are part of that moving forward for what the future generations will have. And it's really an invitation to be magnificent. So we thank you all for being with us this week, and we will be with you again next week.